I just finished my first playthrough of the cult classic PlayStation 1 RPG Wild Arms, so let's talk about it. Alright, so where else could I possibly start with this game but talking about the intro? I think that this is probably one of the strongest points in the entire game. I know it comes pretty early on, but I just really liked the idea of having two different adventures and actually telling the story of how they came together and actually met. We've got Rudy, Jack, and Cecilia, and the cool thing is you can pick which one of these characters to play as at the beginning of the game in any order you want. So if you want to start with Jack, you can. If you want to start with Rudy, you can. If you want to start with Cecilia, you can. You can literally pick whichever party member you want to start as, and the items that you collect throughout their run actually carries over into the other runs that you do. So there's actually an optimized order on which characters you can play as, and you can, I think, even pop in and out between characters. So if you collect a bunch of healing herbs, during Rudy's playthrough, you can jump into Jack's, who I believe has a more difficult boss fight, and actually utilize those herbs so you have a bit of an easier time getting through the intro. To get into the story just a little bit, out of all the characters at the beginning of the game, I found Rudy to be the most compelling, and truthfully, I think he's also the most compelling character throughout the game. He is kind of an outcast by everybody in his village, and rather than letting this kind of thing get to him, he ends up still loving the world and loving all the people around him, rather than, it making him into a bad guy. And watching him as you go through the intro, and he still chooses to do the good thing and save the kid, even if he has to use his secret technique, which is his arms, which ends up kind of being a decently large part of the story, is him powering up this special ability that he has, and the story goes on to explain why he's even able to do this in general, but the village still vilifies him for it, and they're afraid of him and his power, and they've apparently always kind of disliked him, even though he's done nothing but be nice to everybody in town. It's just the fear and hatred that they have for stuff that happened in the past that kind of makes them dislike him, and they end up kicking him out of the village, and that's how his entire journey starts. With Jack, he ends up starting out as just kind of an Indiana Jones type character, which is pretty cool. I mean, he's definitely the coolest out of the entire, trio or even cast of characters, but, at the beginning I just was like, okay, he's a cool guy. That's nice and all. But later on, he ends up getting a little bit more character development, but just for, I would say, a decent chunk of the playthrough, he seems to be a little one-dimensional in the fact that he's just the cool Indiana Jones fighting character. And Cecilia's story is kind of touching as well, but I don't know, it just didn't hit as home as much for me as Rudy. She's kind of like a somewhat pampered princess, but it's a story that we've kind of seen played out in other mediums, multiple times, where, they don't really dream of life in the palace or life of being the queen. They dream of going and doing other things and traveling the world and doing what they actually want to do rather than leading the country, which in and of itself is pretty, compelling as a character, and her story arc is actually pretty touching, and she gets a lot of good development as the story goes on. But I still just kind of feel like this is, once again, a story that we've seen played out, quite a few times. All right, with the intros and quick, character thoughts out of the way, let's actually get into some of the gameplay parts. The overworld is pretty cool. It's got an awesome theme. The graphics are pretty nice. My favorite mechanic about traversing this world is probably the sprint. I've seen almost no other RPG, or at least I don't think I've even played one yet, that has a mechanic that you can actually sprint around the map. And it's not like Pokemon where you just, hold down the run button, and it's just, why would you ever not hold down the run button? It's just going to make you faster. You actually have to have some skill with it, because you kind of do a slide as you go and have to try to turn corners. So you have to release the run a little early, kind of slide around the corner, do a little drift, if you get what I'm saying, and then you can pick up and start running again. It's extremely satisfying when you get the hang of using this mechanic. At first, it was a little frustrating because it's like I just want to move around faster, but I keep bumping into walls. But like a lot of games, the challenge is a part of the fun. So like I said, once I actually got good at using it, it ended up being a really core and fun mechanic that actually brought a lot more enjoyment to the game than I thought it was going to initially. But this is a role-playing game after all, so let's actually talk about the battles. And in my opinion, this is probably the worst part of this entire game. Now, it's your standard RPG combat. Some spells might be super effective against certain monsters. You have ice, wind, and lightning, and fire. And Rudy and Jack both have their own unique mechanics. Like I said, Rudy's got his arms, so he shoots like rockets, and he's got a couple other really cool kind of spell-like things too. One like summons some robots and shoots a bunch of lasers. He actually gets a laser gun at one point too, which looks pretty awesome. And then Jack has his quick draw moves, but man, I gotta talk about the quick draw moves just a little bit. You get so many of them. I used a guide when I was playing through this game, as I do almost every RPG I play. I just prefer to use a guide when playing through any of them because I kind of like to get all the secrets and all the extra weapons and stuff. I don't like missing out on certain story beats or side characters or side quests or anything because I didn't know they existed, because I didn't take the time to really explore the town and stuff. I just don't have as much time as I used to play games, and I don't really enjoy walking and talking to every single person in town, so using a guide just kind of gets me to the person and gets me doing the side quest and getting into that content that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise a little bit quicker. But that being said, I got almost all of his quick draw hints. I might have actually even gotten them all, but I believe I missed one or two. But truthfully, I only ended up using 3 or 4 of his quick draw abilities throughout the entire game. He has one that heals, but it gets pretty quickly overpowered by just using berries and other healing items. You get tons of these as you go through your playthrough, as long as you're opening chests. And you usually have a lot of spare cash laying around too. I never had a huge problem with money in this game, where you can always buy healing items as well. And Cecilia's healing abilities are also, if you want to use MP, just a lot more powerful and better, and I'd rather have Jack doing damage most of the time anyways, because he's kind of your fighter. But the only times it was actually truly useful is he's got a couple one-on-one battles to get other quick draw hints, so in those instances it was kind of nice to have. I would just use her. So yeah, kind of rant over. It was kind of cool getting all of his hints and quick draw abilities, but to learn them you also have to use them in combat without them actually doing the effect. And some of these took a really, really long time to unlock. And I think it has something to do with your luck stat, which you can wear certain clothing and do certain things in the game which will raise your luck stat. But regardless, even when I had his luck stat raised, some of them I had to use it over and over and over again before he'd actually learn the ability. And then a lot of times once you finally learned it, I was like, oh, well, that's not that powerful. It's a little underwhelming. And then I would just move on and keep using the same stuff that I had always been using. So a lot of people actually said that this was one of the better mechanics in the game, but just for me personally, I didn't really enjoy it. I wish I could have got more use out of it. Maybe I'm just being a bit of a pleb, and it might be super OP and powerful, and I'm just not doing it right. But I don't know. I thought it was just okay. Rudy's arms are a little more compelling to me. Usually you'll find like an arms upgrade in a chest in a dungeon or something like that, and at first they're pretty weak. It'd be kind of cool if I got it and it was strong right away in the dungeon, but usually it's weak enough where I end up just using whatever arms he came into the dungeon with. But once you get out of there, you can actually spend some gold and perform upgrades to raise the accuracy, raise the amount of ammo he can hold, raise the damage. I mean, 90% of the time I just raise damage because that's what you want to do, but accuracy is pretty important too. Although there is another mechanic in the game that kind of makes having aim percentage not as relevant. This is probably the most interesting thing, but as you cast spells and get hit, you have this little meter that powers up and it lets you use some special abilities. You can summon guardians with this, you can empower your abilities, and you can do a couple other cool things. One of Rudy's is that you get this lock-on ability, and I believe it either makes it so you just will not miss with your arms, or it raises the accuracy to like probably 99% or something. I don't think I ever missed while using the lock-on ability, but regardless, that was probably the most spice that they added to battles, was this mechanic where a meter fills as you are battling to use special abilities. But even that wasn't super engaging. I mean, the more I got hit, the higher it raised, and then I could just do something more powerful. Like summoning a guardian just inherently does a ton of damage and heals my party sometimes, depending on the guardian, for a bunch of health. The whole thing felt a lot like Pokemon in a way, and I don't know if that's a great comparison, but you know, you have your status effects, you have your damaging abilities, and you just kind of go back and forth. There isn't really anything disrupting this, motion. And once you've been doing it for a couple hours, it gets a little stale. Now, if this was like my first RPG ever, I don't think I would have really minded as much, kind of like how I didn't mind in Pokemon. But when you go back to Pokemon, or you go back to a game like Wild Arms, I end up feeling like the combat is extremely sluggish. And most of the time, especially in random battle encounters, I was just mashing X throughout the entire thing. But with the combat and other mechanics kind of out of the way, let's actually talk about some more of the story and setting. So, as you can tell with the title Wild Arms and maybe by the cover art, this is kind of supposed to be a Western themed RPG, which I was really excited about. People were hyping this fact up a lot. They were like, oh my gosh, it's like cowboys, but it's an RPG, and it's, made in Japan, so it's got a lot of like that JRPG, elements to it. It's not like, I don't know, playing Red Dead, but with levels. It's like actually a traditional RPG, but with a bunch of cowboys and cowboy music. And I'm like, that is such a cool concept, and it's kind of refreshing from playing the stereotypical, medieval fantasy that we're always getting. My biggest issue is, even though this game says it's going to have that Western theme, to me, it didn't lean heavily enough into it. I heard that maybe the sequels, like 3, leans a little more heavily into the Western theme, where games like 2 and 4 go even further away. But to me, this one kind of sits somewhere in the middle, and even maybe leaning a little more into fantasy. I mean, the way that this plot goes is there's a bunch of demons, don't know where they came from, but basically they want to destroy the entire planet and re-inhabit it with their own species. So you have to go on this journey collecting a bunch of runes that actually summon your guardians. You end up going to a lot of these pyramids, which sounds maybe like a little Indiana Jonesy, which, his cowboy hat and the whip and going out into the desert. But in reality, they end up kind of feeling like old medieval castles when you're on the inside of them. Everything's usually like brick and moss and stuff like that, which is a pretty typical setting for like a medieval fantasy game. And as you're going through these pyramids, you're kind of teleporting around, and there's a lot of like magic involved. And I mean, in, a more cowboy setting, I guess I wasn't expecting like kings and queens and stuff like that to begin with. There's cowboys and sheriffs for these small towns. The closest they ever get to having towns feel like a true, old Western style is there's a couple like Native American kind of towns where you can clearly tell that they're leaning into, a little more of that like Native American side of Westerns. But that's about as close as they ever get to being like truly Western. Otherwise, almost every other town you go to and visit is like kind of fantastical, magical, medieval fantasy. And even the way the story starts to end up playing out is there's like this ancient race that was able to like harness magic called the Elw. I don't know how you pronounce it. I just was saying the L. I don't know. But the L were able to harness all these magic abilities, and apparently a sword was built that split the world almost in half, and it created this huge desert. And because humans couldn't like control themselves, they ended up like leaving to a different identical dimension so that they still could like inhabit Filgaia, but not actually be with the humans who were kind of like ruining everything. And there's like these golems and stuff like that were built a long time ago with like magic and technology that were used to fight off the demons and stuff. And none of this really makes me feel like, oh, I'm hopping on a Western train and there's buffalo out in the distance and cactuses, and I'm going to a mining town and anything like that. I mean, there's a couple caves, and I think that some of them were used for mining. Like the first cave that Rudy goes into, I think maybe was a mining cave. But you just get these little Western, sprinkles once in a while in the game. It's just, it really wasn't enough for me to be like, wow, this is like a super old Western style RPG. And I'm not really knocking it, for this fact. I think the story overall was pretty solid, and especially towards the end of the game when stuff started to actually pick up, it was pretty engaging and had me hooked in up until the end. But I would say with the way everybody was talking about it, my expectations were maybe a little higher than what they should have been on the old Western theme. Now, there's not a whole lot more that I want to say about this game without actually doing a full-on review later on. I would love to go more in depth on every little story beat and all the dungeons and items and stuff like that. But just to close this out, I really actually did enjoy the ending quite a bit. I would say the last 2 to 3 hours of the game was probably the best part of it overall for me. Maybe even up to 4 or 5. The last like 4 or 5 hours of the game were probably the strongest piece outside of the opening sequence where everybody meets each other. The hook was really good, and then the ending to me was also really good. Stuff started to really ramp up. We had, you know, Jack's big reveal kind of towards the end there, and like who he actually is and what he was actually fighting for, and he has a lot of really big emotional moments which kind of pulled him in as a character for me, where he wasn't just cool Indiana Jones man. He ended up being like, you know, a bit of a outcast with, you know, a love interest that he lost, and I just really started to get into him towards the end. And then figuring out, you know, Rudy's secret as well. I'm trying to keep out spoilers here. But figuring out Rudy's secret as well, and finding out that, you know, there's a reason why people treated him as an outcast, even if they didn't know exactly what he is. And then learning more about the man that raised him and stuff really made me feel for his character a lot, even when I had already had a lot of feelings for him at the very beginning of the game. It kind of wrapped everything up in a nice little burrito for me, and like a nice little Rudy burrito. And then Cecilia, you know, you don't really see a lot of strong female characters in video games, and this is one thing I always felt like JRPGs were like extremely good at, was actually writing pretty strong female characters. And towards the end of the game, you feel like Rudy's the main guy because he's on the cover and he's out front, and even the way the dialogue goes, and he's actually a silent protagonist too, which I kind of forgot to mention. Which makes it seem like you're supposed to be him on this journey. Cecilia ends up being more of the central character to me to everything that's going on than even Rudy does. She ends up being so powerful and holding so much weight on her shoulders to, you know, complete this task and kind of like save the world and all that stuff. And I think she handles a lot of these situations with a lot of like strength that, like I said, I just really appreciate the way that they had written her character. She is no damsel in distress at any point in the game. She's a true, powerful, like, hero and leader throughout the entire thing. But yeah, with all that being said, that is my, like, initial just, you know, brain barf thoughts on Wild Arms. I'm actually, like, really excited to play Wild Arms 2. I already started it. I played actually the original Wild Arms the way that you were supposed to play it, you know, on a traditional PS1. I kind of swapped between using my PS3 and playing on like my larger TV on the living room and my actual PS1 on my CRT in the game room here. But with Wild Arms 2, I think I was kind of missing out on getting trophies in Wild Arms 1. I was like, I didn't realize it was on the PlayStation Network. I want the trophies. I feel like I did like almost everything in the game, and I would have got probably almost a platinum, or I would have got a platinum maybe. But I'm going to be playing Wild Arms 2 probably on my PS5, trying to get all the trophies and doing all the side quests. But yeah, I'm actually really excited to play through that game, and just to give my initial thoughts, because I got through the opening segment, I was actually super impressed with the character writing within the first, 3 segments. The translation could have used a little ironing out, but that being said, like, I still, translation aside, felt like the characters were like even more compelling in Wild Arms 2 than they were in this first game, and I think that's a pretty big accomplishment because I was already pretty hooked in on these 3 in the original game to start with, that I even thought, I wonder if I'm going to be able to like get into this next trio in the second game, or if I'm going to be like wishing that they were the original trio from the first game. But so far I haven't really felt like that at all. It's they all have really refreshing and new backstories, and it's been really cool, and the graphics are gorgeous. That's one thing that Wild Arms 1 gets kind of knocked down for too in battles. Forgot to mention, but yeah, the in-battle graphics are super horrendously ugly. But yeah, I don't know, never really bothered me. I'm like kind of big into the old school, early Polygon era graphics, so I kind of found it charming and even pretty hilarious at times. The way everything dies, they kind of just go like whoop, and just smush down and disappear into the ether. They don't have an actual death animation. They actually keep that in Wild Arms 2, which I was like, okay, I don't know how long apart these games are from coming out, but you'd think with the improved graphics, maybe we could have a better death animation, but whatever. Wasn't in the budget, I guess. Anyways, ramble done. Wild Arms 1, pretty awesome game. Would I put it like in my top, 10 PS1 games? No. I don't even think I'd actually put it very high up in my RPG list either. Let me think. It's actually probably the worst RPG I've played on the PS1 so far, but out of the ones I have played, which is Final Fantasy IX, Parasite Eve, Chrono Cross, Final Fantasy VII, Vandal Hearts, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Star Ocean Second Story. I mean, those are some extremely heavy hitters and just like excellent games and timeless classics even on a lot of those. So it had some pretty stiff competition in that category. Like I said, unfortunately, I'd have to put it on the bottom, but that does not mean it's a bad game by any means. You like Final Fantasy IX and 7 and Final Fantasy Tactics and Star Ocean. Those are all like A and S tier games, easily. Wild Arms I'd probably put in like a B tier, but B tier is still pretty excellent. Like I still even put that above like a C tier. So very good game. Doesn't quite cross into the echelon of like A or S, where all the other RPGs I've played probably kind of sit in that range. Those are like, all of them are just amazing, timeless classic games. It's time to stop rambling. I keep going on different tangents. Gonna end the video here. Thank you for watching. If you decided to listen to this long-winded, thought blurb that I just rambled on about, but if you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. This is one of the first times I've ever used a green screen, so I hope I used it to its fullest potential and made the video look nice and appealing. We'll see how that went, but I'm going to try to use it more in the future. I've kind of had it just sitting and collecting dust up until now, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to set it up. I'm going to use it. I'm going to make some kind of video out of it. So, yeah, like I said, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, the usual stuff, and I'll see you in another video.